I want to welcome those who will be joining us to the YouTube video. This is the Moorhead Church of Christ Wednesday evening Bible study. We're studying through the book of Judges. And tonight we'll be in chapter 16. But before we get into the actual chapter, just want to review what we covered in chapter 15. And so if you've been following along, you'll recall that Samson had returned to Timnah to have sexual relations with his wife, only to learn that from his father-in-law that he had given her in marriage to one of his companions. As a result, he tied together the tails of 300 foxes with torches and set them loose in the fields of the Philistines, their standing grain, their vineyards, and their olive groves, and destroyed them all. The Philistines in turn burned his father-in-law's house with his father-in-law and his wife inside. Samson struck back at them ruthlessly with a great slaughter. And the Philistines then demanded that the men of Judah turn Samson over to them so that they could do to Samson what he had done to them. After the men of Israel handed Samson over to the Philistines bound with ropes, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson, and he killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. And that's where we're at, going into Judges chapter 16. So, I'd like to ask for a volunteer to read the first couple verses, 1 through 3. Okay, Ryan, you want to read Judges chapter 16, verses 1 through 3, please.
Sure. Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. When it was told to the Gazites, saying, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. And they kept silent all night, saying, let us wait until the morning light, then we will kill him. Now Samson lay until midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the city gate and the two posts, and pulled them up along with the bars. Then he put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of the mountain, which is opposite Hebron.
Okay, so here we really are going to begin sort of the downfall of Samson. And one of the things that we see with Samson is that he is a very strong man, very physically strong man, but he seems to be ruled by sort of just the wrong spirit in terms of how he's conducting his life, that he is really not making the wisest of choices, especially as he deals with women in his life. He seems to really want to focus on Philistine women. That's who he's wanting, in spite of the pleas of his parents to find a wife from among their own people. Clearly, verse 1 says he goes to Gaza. Gaza is a Philippine city. In fact, it's one of the 5 principal cities of the Philistines. And Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary says that the southernmost city of Canaan was Gaza, was situated on the great caravan route between Mesopotamia and Egypt at the junction of the trade route from Arabia. This location made Gaza an ideal rest stop and commercial center for merchants and travelers. Gaza was originally allotted to the tribe of Judah by Joshua, and as we see at some point, these Philistine people, essentially come and they invade that area and take it over. And so Samson goes to Gaza and says he saw a harlot there. We don't even know why he was there, but he goes there, he saw a harlot, and it says that he went into her. And of course, he's talking about sexual relations with her. Leon D. Stancliffe, in his commentary, God's Messages Bible Commentary series, says here, not having suffered enough already, talking about Samson, he says he marches right back into the midst of these Philistine people again and begins to look around, and his eyes light upon a harlot, and he went into her. And so these are one of these things as people of faith, when we look at sort of Samson and we see that, and in a lot of ways, it's just very disappointing behavior. He doesn't seem to be really, orientated to really be a godly man, and yet as we've been studying, Hebrews 11:32 says that he was a man of faith, and so the idea is the overall part of Samson's life is he was a man of faith, but we're really seeing and scrutinizing some details here in terms of the decisions he made, and they seem very poor when we look at that, especially when we recognize that this is really going to be his downfall and the things that are going to be revealed in this chapter. God is, in spite of Samson and his foolish decisions, his immoral decisions, God is going to providentially use what Samson is doing here in order to help bring about the deliverance of the Israelites from Philistine oppression, right?
Yeah, it's probably a silly question, but is this the same Gaza that's the Gaza of today? Like, would it be the same?
There's Gaza City, the modern day, there's Gaza City, and then there's a strip called, this area called Gaza. I do not know if it's one and the same or not, but it very likely could be.
I was just kind of curious.
Yeah.
I'm like, because I know sometimes they'll rename a city years later and they call it that, but I'm like, I wonder if it's in the same location or.
Yeah, some of these ancient cities, they've changed the names, but they're the same names. Like Gaza, for instance, here, according to Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, Gaza means stronghold. So I don't know if that has to do with sort of a layout of the area or how it came to be known, but the word itself means stronghold. So yeah, that's a good question. Verse 2 says, when it was told to the Gazites, saying, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. And they kept silent all night, saying, let us wait until morning light, then we will kill him. And so by this time, Samson is somewhat of their nemesis for the Philistines. He is a hostile threat to the Philistine people. He has done great harm to these people. Remember, he is a judge that essentially fights against the Philistines without an army. He is the one-man army that fights against them. And so Samson, for whatever reason, goes to this Philistine city of Gaza. They recognize him, and so there might be some differences in the way that Philistines dressed and the way Israelites dressed. There could be some differences in terms of how they look. But if Samson can essentially do some of the things he did, perhaps, the idea that you get somebody that is very muscular, that this guy is going to probably stand out from a lot of people that are coming and going in there, that there's something distinguishable about him. And so he's recognized, and the word starts to spread because this guy is really bad news for the Philistines. And so once they recognize that he is in that city, they come up with a plan of action. Essentially, we're going to sort of lie in wait. We're going to wait for the perfect opportunity, and then we're going to take him out. So, verse 3 says, now Samson lay until midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the city gate and the two posts and pulled them up along with the bars. Then he put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of the mountain, which is opposite Hebron. And so the idea is this is not something that the average person is going to be able to do. This is a tremendous feat that Samson is accomplishing here. And Arthur E. Kundal and Leon Morris in their Tyndale commentaries, the Old Testament and the book of Judges, and Ruth says, quote, talking about Samson, surprised them, you're talking about the guards at the gate of the city, by breaking out of the city in the middle of the night, taking with him the doors and doorposts, as well as the bars securing the doors, which was let into the post. The incredible strength of Samson is shown in the fact that all this woodwork was transported 38 miles, mostly uphill, to Hebron. You're like, why? But it's obviously, he must be onto them. It's obviously that he's trying to show them something by doing what he did, and so he is able to really elude, their desire to capture him and put him to death. And so,
My little commentary notes their conjecture.
Yeah.
Is that Hebron was the chief city of Judah?
Yeah.
And maybe that was a message to the men of Judah who had tried to tie him and get him over.
That could be it. Yeah, that could be it. I mean, it's hard sometimes when they don't sort of explain that. Some of it may be cultural. There's things there that sometimes, aren't really, in the text to indicate that. But I mean, that's very well, why that city versus some other cities. So that's pretty good. John, did you have something?
Is there anything stating how, or kind of showing how old Samson might be?
At this point, I don't know. There's no really indication of how old he is, other than he's an adult. I mean, we can only guess at really what age he is. In chapter 13, he's not even born, and his parents have been told they're going to have the next judge of Israel, and then it essentially has him coming to the point where he's ready to really go up against the Philistines, so whatever age that is. But that's a good question.
Well, is it at the end of 15 there in verse 20, it says he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines.
So that gives you some kind of indication,
So,
wherever he was.
I don't know when he started judging, but
He's at least,
probably 30, 40.
Yeah. yeah, so that's
Probably
a good,
40-ish.
right, that's a good indicator right there so there you go, John, somewhere around that range. Okay, very good. Let's move on to verses 4 through 9. So
I can read that.
Read that.
After this it came about that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, "Entice him and see where his strength lies, and how we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. Then we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me where your great strength is, and how you may be bound to afflict you." Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh cords that have not been dried, then I will become weak and be like any other man." Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh cords that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now she had men lying in wait in an inner room, and she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he snapped the cords as a string of toe snaps when it touches fire. So his strength was not discovered.
Okay, so Samson sort of moves on to obviously another woman here. Verse 4 says it came about that he loved another woman in the valley of Sorek. And somewhere in my notes, there it is, okay. It talks about Sorek. So Sorek means choice vine. This is Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary. And the valley contains such sites as Timnah and Zorah, Samson's birthplace, Beth Shemesh, a fortified outpost near the border of Philistia and Palestine. And here we see that this new woman in his life is named Delilah, and the word actually means dainty or delicate one. So he's got this new Philistine woman. You think from the first go around, he might have a change of thought. This is one of those things we see with Samson, and I guess because of where our vantage point is, it's going to be a bad news. Especially, you kind of get the idea that with the Philistines, they're sort of like frenemies. Not really your friends or your oppressors, but they're somewhat, kind of buddy, but they're not really buddy. And this is kind of who, that they're dealing with, at least in terms of what we're seeing in Samson's life. It says in verse 5, the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and see where his great strength lies and how we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. Then we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So the words here, the Philistines, International Bible Encyclopedia calls them princes. And they're really, here, rulers or kings of these 5 Philistine cities. And obviously everybody's concerned, at least from the Philistine standpoint, about Samson. And it's obvious they know that they're no match for Samson. You know, if he can essentially fight against, 1,000 men and kill them with a jawbone, this is not somebody that they're going to be able to overcome. And so once the lords of Philistines come to realize that he has some kind of relationship with this Delilah, they realize that this might be an opportunity for her to extract really the secret of his strength. The idea that what is it that sort of makes him that strong? And this is a little different than the first go around with the Philistines dealing with his wife, in that there was really a threat. Unless you get this information for us, we're going to burn down your house or your father's house and all that. Here, this is really a financial incentive, and it seems quite substantial that they're willing to pay so much money. And some people have tried to guess what it is. You can tell just by looking at the idea that there's 5 lords, and each one of them are going to give them 1,100 pieces of silver, that this is going to be a significant amount of money. I read one commentary that said that it works out to about $3,700 in 1925. I'm not sure why 1925, but in 1925, $3,700 would probably be quite a bit of money. But obviously, it is something that's going to get her attention and really incentivize her to try to get that information. So here we see that Samson, while he was the strongest of all men, was really weak when it came to women that he loved, because they were able to manipulate him and get what they wanted from him, and this was really his downfall. And you just wonder, about those choices that he makes, and the idea that, he obviously loves Delilah, but there's no mention really of Delilah loving him. And obviously, if she's going to take the money, it's true that she doesn't really have the same love for him. And so he makes another tremendous mistake in pursuing this woman, Delilah. The 1,100 pieces, again here, the NIV footnote says it's about 28 pounds. So for whatever that's worth, 28 pounds of silver. Verse 6 says, so Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength is and how you may be bound to afflict you. This ought to be like alarm bells going. Okay, the woman that I love is asking me this information. And so it's like, why does she need to know this? Why is it that she wants to know this? And of course, he doesn't know about this deal that's been struck between the lords of the Philistines and her.
Hey, Dad.
Oh, John?
You were talking the silver would weigh 28 pounds, wouldn't it?
That's what the New International Version says in a footnote, that all of that combined would be 28 pounds.
Because I was thinking with today's price on silver, that would be roughly $10,000 to $12,000 in our today's money.
Okay. Well, that'd be considerable amounts. Yeah, make her say, okay, yeah, I guess so. Verse 7 says, Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh cords that have not been dried, then I will become weak and be like any other man. So I want you to sort of think about why Samson doesn't just come out and tell her the truth. Why is it that he's really just sort of feeding her a line, right?
He probably knows her intention. She's a Philistine.
Okay.
And if he were to just give it to her, he's in their territory. It would be a bad move on his part.
he obviously has some kind of awareness that this may not be the best idea
Yeah.
to tell this woman, even though I love her, what the secret of my power is. And so what you're going to have is Samson sort of playing this game with her, okay? And so he's playing this game with her and just sort of saying, well, you know, if you do this, that, and the other, then this is what's going to happen. So this will be the first of Samson's lies to Delilah to protect the real source of his strength. But the problem is that even though he believes that this is a game of sort of cat and mouse that he can play with Delilah and win, he in the end is going to lose this game. Verse 8 says, then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her seven fresh cords that had not been dried, and she bound him with them. And so Delilah says, hey, this is what we need. And we just get these cords, and then we tie him up with them, and then he's not going to be able to exercise his strength. And here, according to Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, talking about these cords, it says it's a long line of twisted fiber used to bind or secure. In Bible times, cord and rope were made from flax, date tree fibers, or even strips of camel hide. Verse 9 says, now she had men lying in wait in an inner room, and she said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he snapped the cords as a string of toe snaps when it touches fire, so his strength was not discovered. And the idea is that it seems to be sort of like a test, like you guys hide out there, and then we'll sort of freak him out, see what happens. Because essentially, if he's not able to get through, then you guys can come and get him. But eventually, you know, if he's able to break it. So toe straps, or toe, I should say, toe snaps, according to International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, says the coarser part of flax with short threads used as an example of easily inflammable material. And so the idea is a lot of times it says it's used as a wick. And so the idea, this is the material that were used in these toe snaps, and Samson was able to get out of it. And so obviously it becomes clear to Delilah that he has misled her about that. But you know, she is not going to give up. Delilah proves to be a very persistent woman, and so she will continue to try to get that information out of Samson. Any questions or comments before we get into 10 through 12? Okay, not. Somebody else would like to read? Jenna? Okay, you want to read 10 through 12, please?
Okay. Then Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have deceived me and told me lies. Now please tell me how you may be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me tightly with new ropes, which have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. For the men were lying in wait in the inner room, but he snapped the ropes from his arms like a thread.
Okay. So here we get into another situation. So we're really changing sort of the materials and things that are used. And you would think Samson would, at this point, be able to really see what kind of woman this is. Because he's saying, please tell me you know, where your great strength is, and essentially how to sort of to be able to keep you from using it. And he tells her really, you know, a lie about it. But she acts on that lie, which shows that she is acting with hostile intent. In other words, this is why I'm trying to figure out where the, you know, the power of your strength is, essentially, so I can take that from you. And she's really showing her true colors here in what she's doing here. Leon D. Stancliffe in God's Messages Bible commentary says, quote, can we not see her, Delilah's, pouting and winking at Samson as she speaks? We realize he does not have the intellectual strength to resist her pleas. In other words, why didn't you just come out and say, you know, let's talk about something else? Why is it that he keeps going down this road with her? He doesn't know he's going to get beat at this game. If he had any realization, he wouldn't have played the game. Why doesn't he just say, it's not important. Let's just talk about you and I sitting under the tree and, having a picnic or whatever it is going to be. The idea that he just doesn't say anything. He just keeps going along with it, which is really surprising because it's sort of like, she's up to no good. And yet you're sort of playing this game with her. Yeah. Verse 11, talking about Samson, said, he said to her, if they bind me tightly with new ropes, which have not been used, then I will become weak and be like any other man. And so this is lie number 2. So the idea of ropes, verse 12. So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, or they're approaching you. And so, he snapped the ropes from his arms like a thread. And this is really how Samson was turned over to the Philistines from the men of Israel, with new ropes. And so you would think, hey, this, we've seen this before. Maybe it could be different Philistines or whatever, but the idea is that didn't contain him at all. And so he snaps those ropes like they were sort of like the thread that you would use on a cloth, as if they're really nothing at all. So this is quite impressive when we think about what had to be done and how she must have tied up his hands and his arms, and really think, well, you know what, he's not going anywhere. And then she says, Philistines are upon you, and he's like, ugh. So kind of interesting how this goes, and yet he just doesn't really sort of see that if she really loved you, Samson, she wouldn't be trying to set you up for a fall and really destroy you. And it's hard to say what he was thinking. Let's read verses 13, 14. Brother Timothy, would you like to read?
Okay. 13. Delilah said to Samson, until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my hair into the web of the loom. So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom, and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he awoke from his sleep and pulled out the batten and the web from the loom.
All right, very good. You think Samson would be laying there with one eye open going, keep an eye on her. I don't know if she's going to try to do this or not. But Delilah is probably very frustrated with Samson now, because he's essentially saying, I'm going to tell you the truth. And of course he's not. He's lying to her. And she's not going to give up. She continues to badger Samson about the source of his great strength. And so Samson continues to play this game, and so he tells her lie number 3. And so now he's saying, you've got to do something with my hair. So we've kind of went from the hands or the arms, and you see how we're just sort of moving closer to the point there. And the locks, translated in the NIV and Amplified Bible, are braids. And it's talking about some kind of web fastened with a pin. The idea seems to be, when I looked at this, the idea of sort of weaving his hair. And so you can see different kind of pictures sometimes that people make. The idea of he's sort of weaving his hair in some way, and then you're sort of putting a pin to sort of hold it all in place. And so that's exactly what Delilah does. The idea is, okay, you told me the secret of your power. Hey, guess what? I'm going to do exactly what you said, essentially, so that I can sort of rob you of that power. Verse 14 says, so while he slept, Delilah took the 7 locks of his hair, wove them into a web. She fastened it with a pin and said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. But he woke from his sleep, pulled out the pin of the loom and the web. So far, Samson has been a very fortunate man. Unfortunately, he's told 3 lies, but he's survived every one of Delilah's really attacks, really to to really take that power away from him, really just using that to try to stop him. All right, Cinda, would you like to read?
Sure.
Verses 15 through 17, please.
Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the third time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength." With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death. So he told her everything. "No razor has ever been used on my head," he said, "because I've been a Nazarite set apart to God since birth. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me and I would become as weak as any other man."
So finally, the truth comes out. And you look at it from, we kind of look at this, you're like, Samson, you had no incentive to tell her. You knew what she was looking for. You knew that she was trying to get the information. You should know what's going to come. It shouldn't be a surprise when it comes, because you've essentially divulged the truth to her. And what we see here is really Samson falling into her emotional manipulation. This is kind of similar to what we've seen back in chapter 14 and verse 16. And what we see is there's really just sort of pouring it on thick. How can you say you love me when your heart is not with me? Samson, come on. Why are you doing this to me? Tell me. And so she is really working overtime to get that information. And verse 16 says, this really, the determination here came about when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him that his soul was annoyed to death. And I like the translation Cindy used. Was that NIV? Okay, that's what it says. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was what? Sick to death of it. In other words, you know what? She just kept doing it and kept doing it. It was like the drip, you know, ding, the drip, the drip, the drip, and drip is like, okay, I can't stand it anymore. So he gives in. He finally tells her. So I don't know how many days this took, but my guess is that it probably was something after the last time he told her a lie, that maybe it was like, I don't want to talk about it, you know, whatever, trying to put it off. But the idea is that she kept coming back to it. And so really just the fact that she was relentless and pressed him for that information. And it says here about this word annoyed. This is New American Standard. It's really, the Hebrew word is of utter discouragement. And here in Judges 16:16, that is about Samson. He was worn out by importunity. The idea here is repeatedly asking for something in a forceful and annoying way. And this is essentially how he finally sort of gave it all up. And we think, well, you know, if you would have never went down this road, you probably would have never ended up here. But that is the road that Samson decided to take. Verse 17, it says, so he told her all that was in his heart and said to her, razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man. So now the truth is out. And it is not going to be something that goes well for Samson. I did want to share with you from the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, talking about hair in relation to the Nazarite vow. It says, quote, the long, untouched hair was therefore considered as an emblem of personal devotion or devotedness to God of all strength. And so this was something that obviously was very significant in terms of the Nazarite vow. So I want us to just kind of look at this. We've read really sort of the historical part of it and sort of watch Samson just sort of crumble. But do you suppose that Samson ever envisioned himself revealing the secret of his power to Delilah when they started? You think as well, if he did, why would he go there? And sometimes you sort of think it's like, well, you know, maybe because he thought he was so physically strong that he could be really strong against her mentally. And, you know, Samson did not really realize that he was eventually going to be pulled into the terrible decision that he made. Considering really what's happened here, or what led up to this point with Samson, what error in judgment did he make? What error in judgment did Samson make when you sort of think about this?
We're going way back to even going and messing around with Philistine women.
Okay. So the idea is he's really not picking somebody that really is in his best interest. We sort of look at that. How about this too? The idea is that you allowed yourself to be put in harm's way. You put yourself in a situation that you should have never allowed yourself to be put in. Okay? The reason why I want to talk about this is we've got to find some kind of relevance, you know, about this today. Obviously, we're not Samson, and we're not going to repeat some of the things that happened here, but obviously there's some relevance here. And I'll ask you, what lesson or lessons can we learn from Samson's poor lack of judgment as Christians today? And as you're thinking about that, let's read 1 Corinthians 10:12. 1 Corinthians 10:12. Brindley, do you want to read that? Are you there? Okay. 1 Corinthians 10:12.
So, if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall.
Okay. What's the lesson there? Paul's given a warning to the Corinthians.
Don't let your guard down.
Okay.
We are by nature very likely to stumble, and
Okay.
the further away you are from the edge, the better. That way you can stumble and still get back up as opposed to go off the edge.
Okay. Okay. So there seems to be the idea is that, you know, Samson may have been overconfident in what he thought he could handle. Again, the idea that you're so physically strong. So if you imagine, you know, Samson and Delilah squaring off and, you know, trying to see who's going to pin who, and we know how it's going to go. He's obviously stronger than she is. And yet, the idea that you think physical strength, that's going to help essentially defeat any kind of challenges that she should put up to you sort of intellectually or mentally. But, you know, it goes along with what Kendall's saying. We should not walk so close to the edge between righteousness and wickedness that we don't allow ourselves to eventually slip into sin. The idea that, you know, putting yourself in harm's way, how many Christians essentially just aren't really devoted to really staying on track with what God wants in life, and essentially wants to really get as close as they can to the line and say, you know, I think I can get this far, when essentially you think you're in a strong point because you're right here at the edge. You don't realize that it doesn't take much to essentially get pulled over the line. And so as Christians, you know, our heart's desire should be to live close to God and to walk with God, really to treasure God's wisdom and really make the kind of choices that are going to be pleasing to God and put us really in a position of strength, rather than essentially allowing ourselves to sort of think that we're going to be able to put ourselves in compromising positions or harm's way, and essentially only to find out, you know, that we've sort of stumbled as a result. Cinda?
Do you remember, and I don't have internet, so I can't look it up real quick, the verse that talks about, that God won't allow you to be tempted without
Yeah.
providing a way of escape.
1 Corinthians 10:13, yeah.
Yeah, so when I'm thinking of that, I'm just thinking about, you know, not only, I mean, we think about teenagers to this point, but I think adults as well, that when you stand too close to a peer group that doesn't have your same morals, your
Right.
same direction, and then you wanna be like the cool kids, and you wanna be liked, and you wanna be well thought of, and then you begin to compromise and compromise. It's like, oh, come on, don't be
Yeah.
stodgy.
A little bit of that won't hurt, a little bit of, yeah.
It'll all be fine, yeah, and you just get a little closer and a little closer, and like we say, Samson, I mean, how big a fool was he, didn't see this coming, but we do the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, when we allow people to drag us closer and closer and closer, and when you talk about a way of escape,
Yeah.
you know, I think as a younger Christian, I always thought God was gonna empower me to stand against it, but then I learned sometimes it comes that way, but many times it comes with the wisdom to not go down that road.
Right.
Many
That's
times
right.
it comes with the wisdom to say, let's just not walk down the road full of craters and hope that we don't fall in a hole. Let's take the
Yeah.
other road, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an excellent observation. Just sort of looking at it that way. The idea is a lot of times, again, we're quick to sort of blame the devil for all of our faults, but I mean, the devil only exploits really weakness. So if we put ourselves in a position of weakness, I mean, we say, well, you know, the devil, this, that, and the other. The idea is we're making his job that much easier if we can't really sort of recognize that some things aren't going to be in our best interest.
Yeah, and I think this is particularly hard sometimes for new Christians, especially if they're, you know, baptized as adults and have adult relationships, friendships,
Sure.
and patterns
Right.
that were not the patterns that they want to live under anymore. And
Yep.
I think it's really hard, I think, sometimes to keep those relationships and not get dragged.
Right, and I think that's the real challenge is making sure that you have this line, and you're like, you know what, I've got to have this line in terms of dealing with worldly friends that I'm not willing to cross, and I've got to really, if we're wise and we're smart, we've already thought about what happens if we're about ready to get pulled over that line. We already have a game plan in mind to say, you know, people are trying to get us to do whatever. We've already given it some thought about, here's what I would say. And, you know, you can sort of say it in a number of different ways, but hopefully you're going to say something because the inevitable is going to happen. In other words, if you don't want to sort of stumble and you don't want to get pulled into sin, you have to do something. I think looking at Samson's story at the very beginning, if we hadn't read this before, we would not think that Samson would get beat. We would think he's a strong guy. He's not going to get beat. And yet the idea is that he did get beat. And the reason why he did get beat is because he wasn't smart about what he was doing. And he put himself right in a way that essentially, you know, that he was going to be drawn in. Timothy?
Yeah, I'm just misled because I've been, this very particular verse, I've read it over and over. Like last night when I read it, I was not thinking, wide imagination, why will someone as strong as Samson do this? Somebody was called by God to minister to his people and not the rest. But however, the Bible said, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Now, also, we need to also take into consideration the free will that God has given to man. Samson has that free will.
Yeah.
And he chooses to use his free will to his
Sure.
detriment. You look, Samson so much relied on his ability, on his self-direction. Like, unlike the other judges, we learn about them when they are in difficult situations. They pray to God. God, direct me, and this Joshua, Caleb, and they pray to God. They seek God direction. When you read about the life of Samson, nothing like that.
Yeah.
It's just like somebody who is just living a life, just anyhow, nonchalant about what he does. Just, I have strength, I can do whatever I
Yeah.
feel. So it's like when a Christian chooses not to depend on God,
Right.
that is what happens when you want to depend on yourself.
Yeah.
I can do it, at least I can handle things, I can do this, I don't need directive, I don't need advice, I don't need God. I got this myself, so
Sure.
that's what.
You rely on your own strength. And I think it's easy to put ourselves in a position of judging Samson and saying, don't do it, you know, and then not sort of seeing that, you know, the same thing can happen to us today if we sort of, you know, flirt with things that we shouldn't, or we put ourselves in in a position where we are very open to making really the wrong choice. And the idea, this is where we sort of learn from, you know, the mistakes of others, and why we're gonna say, Samson, you know, it's easy to say, you know, Samson, if I was in your shoes, I'd have never done that. And then sort of have a total disconnect, you know, when we get to our own lives, and then we find ourselves not really really, you know, asking for God's strength and wisdom and using good judgment. In other words, it's not like they were not allowed under the Nazarite vow to tell somebody, like that was supposed to be something he couldn't tell anybody about, sort of the power of his strength. But it obviously was not in his best interest. It was not good judgment, seeing especially that he was a judge of Israel and that he'd been appointed really essentially to be, you know, the one that's going to free them from Philistine oppression. It just makes zero sense. And the idea that you can sort of play a game with it and somehow you're going to come away with it shows us that, you know what, for a while he was winning the game until essentially, you know, Delilah pulled him over the line. And got exactly what she wanted.
Timothy's point, I think the devil does a little dance when he hears us say, oh, I would never, whatever that sentence is.
Yeah, I'd never do that. But the idea is that you got to learn from this stuff. This is why it's in you. We got to learn from it.
And just don't ever underestimate our capacity in our flesh.
Right.
To do things that, you know, and how many people have you heard stories of that make horrific mistakes and said, I would have never thought I would have ended up. You can't leave the side of God ever.
Right.
Because the minute you step out and think, oh, I'm too righteous, I'm too moral, I've got my stuff too together, I can dance this line.
Right.
Oh, you've had it.
So you wouldn't, like if you had worldly friends or whatever, you would not want to engage in conversation about sin that sort of the world's, you know, embraces and enjoys if you're vulnerable in that area of sin. Why would you even go down that road and discuss it? And then have them sort of say, yeah, wouldn't it be good if we did this, that, or the other, or whatever. The idea is you're vulnerable already. If you're vulnerable in this sin, the last thing you want to do, if you're not going to essentially say the Bible says X, Y, and Z and sort of back up, sort of go down there and sort of discuss the ins and outs. Say, before I became a Christian, you know, I used to this and this. I'm like, you know, that isn't going to do any good for you unless the whole point is to recognize, you know, you're lost, and that's why you turn to Jesus, and you don't want to talk about the passing pleasures of sin because essentially it's going to cost your soul. But I think there's a lot of things here in God's Word, when we meditate on it and we really give it thought, the idea is, you know what, there's a valuable lesson here that can bless our lives, and it can bless the lives of our brothers and sisters in Christ, probably save them a lot of misery if they recognize that truth that's here for us. So.
Yeah, and I think the other central thing there, and you could look up a million proverbs and other verses to back it up, is the idea of trust the right people. And how important, you know, and I've seen in Kendall and I's life, and what we're trying to teach the girls as they get older, that you kind of have circles of friendship like ripples in a pond, right?
Right.
And those closest people may only be 2 or 3 people, but humans by their very creation, by who we are, we copy.
Right.
I mean, even little babies, you stick their tongue out and they'll stick their tongue out back at you. Like, we copy each other.
Yeah.
And those 2 or 3 people need to be people that the more you're like them, the better that is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then as you get further and further out, you can have friends that are a little more worldly and a little more, I'm
because
gonna
they
be
don't
in
have
this
the same
situation, not that,
influence.
but
Yeah.
those type friends have
Right.
to be people that you can trust and
Right. Yeah, because then you're ultimately putting yourself in a position of strength.
Yeah, and how much more your spouse
Yeah.
to be one of those people.
Yeah, yeah, and there's right there, married Christian. Married Christian, a faithful Christian, you'll never be sorry. You're only sorry if you marry somebody who's not a Christian. You say, you know, then people only come back and say around and say, you know, I didn't think it would go this way. And it's like, you know why? Because your head was in love potion number 9 in the clouds, and you thought love is going to conquer all, and then you didn't realize that, you know, all of your bargaining and negotiating comes before you get married, and if you got to think about compatibility besides all your hobbies and things and where you want to live and all that. The idea is, are you even on the same page spiritually? So that's important to try to get young people to know so that they make a good choice, because your spouse will have a significant influence on your life. Yeah. So, well, I appreciate your time and comments, questions. I want to thank those who will be watching the video. Hopefully it'll be a blessing to you as we sort of open up God's Word and look at what it says and really try to make application to our lives. God bless you.